Here's a message from today's episode's sponsor.
Insulet, makers of Omnipod, are proud to partner with the Pharmacy Podcast Network to support the 2023 APHA annual meeting and exhibition. The Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery aid system is indicated for people with type 1 diabetes ages 2 years and older. Omnipod 5 is the first and only tubeless aid system in the United States that is exclusively available in the pharmacy. The Omnipod 5 combines a tubeless, waterproof, wearable pod that integrates with Dexcom G6 CGM to automatically adjust insulin based on glucose trends every 5 minutes. Visit the Omnipod team at booth 216 to learn more about this innovative technology. Disclaimers: the pod has an IP28 rating for up to 25 feet for 60 minutes. The Omnipod 5 controller is not waterproof. The Dexcom G6 is sold separately and requires a separate prescription. Visit omnipod.com/safety for additional important safety information.
You're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
The Pain Pod.
You want to see pain? Look at these.
Welcome to The Pain Pod, the podcast for all things pain management. Hosted by the Pain Guy, Dr. Mark Garofoli. We'll be collaborating with numerous pain management experts, talking about substance usage disorders, the latest treatment modalities, and most important, focusing on the pain of our patients as leading providers of pain care. And now, here's our host, a man wanted in all 50 states, a suburban city-like mountain man.
Without the beard.
From the hills of West Virginia, and certified in weapons of mass destruction response. It's Dr. Mark Garofoli.
All right, welcome back everyone to the Pain Pod. As we always say, come one, come all to the Pain Pod. So I'm just going to be frank. I'm pretty stoked about today's episode here, this discussion. Sometimes things just hit home more with colleagues, friends, people you know, and all that. So if you're using your seat, just go to the edge right now. It's going to work out a lot better if you just sit on the edge, because this is where this conversation is going to go. Okay. All right. So Pain Pod. Here's what we're going to talk about today. There's the often blurred lines between pain management, and substance use disorder addiction. That's a whole conversation, 6 to 8 to 40 hours in itself. But outside of that, perhaps indirectly involved though, we've got a lot going on in our country when it comes to substance-related overdose deaths. Or just deaths, in general. So when it comes to substance-related deaths, of course, the headlines, the topics, the conversations are always concentrating on, let's just say, drugs, whether it's substances of abuse, illegal drugs, illegal substances, whatever we're going with. It's been a while now where we've gone over the 6 figures. Okay, over 100,000 Americans a year die with substance-related deaths. But in the background, we've got the ATF, and we're not here to talk about firearms, but the A and the T. So alcohol, most recent numbers I've seen, give or take, of course, alcohol-related deaths have been about 150,000, whereas tobacco-related deaths, 500,000. I'm sure you're hearing and thinking about those numbers and thinking, wow, alcohol and tobacco are way above quote-unquote drugs. And you're absolutely right. And there's a lot to unpackage in that conversation, right? But no matter what, an American dies every 6 minutes from a drug overdose in our country. Conversely, a baby is born dependent. Don't you dare say addicted, but dependent to opioids specifically every half hour. So that's both spectrums of life, right? So here today, we're going to be jumping into a bunch of topics within this overall realm. And with us, we have Jake Nichols. Who hasn't met Jake? And I'm not talking about Jake from Allstate, if he's even still with Allstate, that other guy, right? I'm talking about Jake Nichols. So, welcome to the Pain Pod, Jake.
Well, thank you, Mark. Absolute pleasure to be here, my friend. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Feelings beyond mutual, of course. So, as it always is. But seriously, a lot of pharmacists, a lot of doctors, a lot of healthcare professionals, heck, a lot of people on this planet have certainly either met Jake or heard him speak, perhaps heard about his story. We all have a story in the end. But what will we do to impact others with our stories? Of course, and Jake does countless efforts going around our country. Quite frankly, I just sum it up as trying to help people. But for those of us who haven't read Unfit for Recovery, that is Jake's book that is out now, literally right now, no matter when you're listening to this. I don't care if you're on a treadmill, a bike, if you're driving, please keep eyes on the road, or if you're sitting around on your couch or something. You need to get that book if you haven't already. So it's called Unfit for Recovery. But for those of us who haven't read it yet, or heard one of your presentations, or Jake, if you give us some insight into you, what's your story? Perhaps an appetizer for eventually reading the book, of course.
Yeah, sure. So that's always a tough question. Where do I start with that one? As a pharmacist, I think we see ourselves as being knowledgeable and quite frankly above addiction. Who knows more about medications than we do? Who knows more about controlled substances, opioids, than we do? And that's really the kind of gist of what carried me through 15 years of substance use. It really kicked off when I was in pharmacy school and culminated, again, 15 years later in 2010 with 513 felony charges, the end of my marriage, bankruptcy, loss of my pharmacy license, and entry into treatment, and ultimately, a career in this field. It's been quite a journey. And the book itself, outlines that journey, but the book really started as kind of a self-examination. What really kicked it off was in late 2020, I had an unfortunate series of events, as we like to say, where, I lost my job. I was engaged, and that relationship ended abruptly without explanation. And we're in the middle of COVID. And it was this period whereby I reflected that, I had 10 plus years in recovery, and I thought I had it down. I thought there was nothing that could bring me down. And I got to a point where I was facing, a bottle of pills to go back down that road. And it really scared me. And I didn't go back down that road. No spoiler there, but it led me to kind of reflect on, how did I get here? How did I get to this point where somebody who grew up in a very supportive, loving family, who didn't have an injury that was, resulted in a prescription for opioids, how did that person end up with a substance use issue? And more importantly, what did I do that was able to allow me to achieve recovery, but more so maintain it? And I won't spoil what the exact title of the book means, but, I began to question whether or not I was truly fit for recovery. And again, it was more of my journey of digging into that to determine the answer to that question.
It's you very succinctly just went over a lot there, bud. I typically hesitate to put my name or the proverbial pain guy name on anything, but folks, you're going to want to read this one. Okay. But anyways, diving maybe too far, but into the book, I couldn't help but notice and appreciate your book's chapters are organized by movie titles. Okay. Yes. And, as a guy who did a TEDx talk, talking about the cinematic experience related to pain, addiction, and everybody on this planet, I couldn't help but just say, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Before the time of streaming, I was known to be a bit of I'd call it a mark buster. I've been called worse, but kind of like Blockbuster, just so we know where we're going there, folks, with DVDs, digital movies, so on and so forth. But going a little bit lighter here, but, there was a lot of movies mentioned there, lots of chapters, right?
Yeah.
So what's your favorite movie? And I got to ask why?
Yeah, well, and that's a very deep question. That's one of the deepest ones I've been asked in a long time, to be honest. But the answer has been the same for as long as I can remember. It's The Empire Strikes Back. And beyond being a massive Star Wars fan, I think my love of that movie and the meaning behind it has interestingly evolved over the years. And, to be clear, I like to remind both of us that we're not that old, but I was 4 years old when that movie came out. And it's one of the first cinematic experiences I can remember in a movie theater. And I probably didn't see it when I was 4, but at some point, it's re-released many times over the years. But
right.
Just my love of that medium, being in a place where everything outside is closed out, you're engulfed in this amazing cinematic experience with visual and auditory. There's nothing else on this earth that I can do or engage in that kind of closes everything out. For me to be enveloped in a movie for a period of 2 hours is a really satisfying and joyous experience. And I think with The Empire Strikes Back, it's one of the earliest memories of my childhood. And again, just the joyous nature of childhood and not having a care in the world. And, again, thinking of the innocence of that time. But again, as time has gone on, as it has evolved, I tell people it's one of the most realistic movies in terms of plot lines, meaning, the characters undergo some really serious challenges to the point where the end of the movie ends on almost a down note for the most part. Luke's lost his hand. He finds out his father's the biggest villain in the galaxy. His team, the Rebel Alliance, is kind of down. They just took away his best friend encased in carbonite, but it somehow manages to end the movie on a hopeful note. Just that scene at the end where they're standing there, they're looking out into the galaxy. They're not overtly smiling, but there's kind of like this, all right, we got this. This seems like this is insurmountable. But there's hope. And that obviously translates a lot into, my messages and a lot of the messages in the book as well.
How wonderfully put. Good golly. I'm feeling slightly inadequate here. My first movie that I saw in the cinema was E.T. E.T. Goes Home. And I know I had my little stuffed animal E.T. and my mom took me and, reminds me of it to this day. And I thank her for that, of course. Lord knows, Pain Guy's mom has certainly listened to every one of these episodes. So thanks, Mom. But it's interesting when folks think there's a couple questions I always ask Pain podcasts, and a movie is not typically one of them. But my favorite's Rocky IV. I'm sure many have heard that before, and it's not because this fake character into the Cold War or something, but the never give up idea too. So but it's interesting the messaging that we get, and then as you eloquently put that cinematic experience, the escape. It overlaps with a lot of other stuff that we're talking about here today, really, of life, good, bad, in the middle, whatever. We all look for that escape. So, all right. So pivoting back to you basically. So you've got quite the career in healthcare and pharmacy, of course, but if you would say, in thinking about this, if your pharmacy career path never pivoted, based on experiences, where do you think you'd be? Hospital, pharmacy, community, managed care, industry, whatever. What take a time machine. Where would you be, you think?
Yeah. So, this is a great question. It's one that I reflect upon a lot when I talk to students who they're curious about your career path, and I'm sure you get this. How do I get to do what you get to do? What do I need to do to get there? And my answer is jokingly, well, you have to become a drug addict and destroy your marriage and go through bankruptcy. And some of them look at me like I'm half serious, but obviously
deer in headlights much.
Yeah, slightly. And to be clear, as a disclaimer, you do not have to do that. But for me, it was an evolution, Mark. Honestly, it was, I came into pharmacy because my best friend's dad, who I consider, as important as my own father, in kind of, having an influence on my life as a mentor, as somebody I just looked up to, and, having a community pharmacy in our town, here in Natick, Massachusetts, and just a relationship he had with the community. And that's what I wanted. And that's what initially drew me to pharmacy. And I came in also at a time where we were transitioning to all PharmD, and the quote unquote clinical role of a pharmacist was really expanding. And I think more importantly, being recognized. I mean, it's always been there, but being formally recognized and embraced by other members of the healthcare community. And, I ended up in this mix of this great kind of clinical community, kind of job where I also got to teach. And I found out that teaching was one of my primary loves as well. As time progressed and I got into other positions, and, I kind of built upon that. And I think the best way to say it is I kept an open mind. When you're early in your career, you think you have a clear idea of where you want to go and what your career path is. But I always kept an open mind, and where I actually found myself most interested was that kind of intersection between clinical and finance. Meaning, we come out of school and we have all these great tools and skills, and we want to improve health and save lives and improve people's quality of life. And that's all well and good, but if it doesn't work out on the balance sheet, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And that really intrigued me, and that led me to go and get a master's degree in business administration. So I saw myself kind of, keeping my hands in the clinical world because I loved the aspects of patient care and interacting with folks. And, whether that was in a community pharmacy or in a primary care clinic, it didn't matter for me. I loved that interaction and just being able to be available and helpful to people. But again, I also saw the challenges of healthcare and really just, I guess, accepted the fact that the financial part is going to be just as much a part of it as the clinical piece is. So I was kind of pursuing roles that balance that. And, that could have been managed care, that could have been, administration. But that's really where I saw myself going before, I ended up in treatment for substance use.
All good, all good. You brought up the idea. I often contemplate this and even talk about it, particularly with our less experienced student pharmacists, med students, everybody within any health sciences campus, of course. But I know most P1 years, or I should say most schools of pharmacy across our country have, a career roundtable or panel or event or something, whether it's alums coming back or whoever. And I encourage everybody out there to do those things. Even for self-reflection, let alone giving back and teaching others. But just about 99.9% of students will walk in thinking, oh, I'm going to learn what I'm going to do. And like you said, how'd you get there? I want to do that. And in reality, it's the real learning is, boy, the possibilities are really endless. Identifying as a pharmacist is like the first question of 1,600 million of them. Then what? So that's pretty cool in the big picture there too. So. All right. So, we talked about your book a little bit there, Unfit for Recovery. Not to throw opinions out there, but you're an incredible author. So you got a lot in the book, of course, but what doesn't the world know about you? Or what would you like to share?
Oh, wow. There's a lot. I know we have limited time here. I think what the world doesn't know is that, there are still struggles. When you achieve recovery or it doesn't have to be substance use. You overcome, a major life issue. We all have them. And if we're not having one now, we're going to have one. I hate to break it to you, but, when we get past that, it kind of allows us to pivot and reset and reflect. I think my perspectives have obviously changed on a lot of things. And, obviously my love of movies hasn't changed. My focus on my kids, my family, are essential. But, I'm starting to question, where I want to go, within this whole recovery thing. And, we talk about, how do you spread the word? And part of, the purpose of writing the book was to let others know that, there are other folks out there that are very similar to you that struggle and are able to overcome it. And I think I just want to continue to be able to spread that word. And the answer to the question is, I still struggle. And one of the things that kind of hit me last night especially related to the book and something that I really wasn't prepared for, and surprisingly wasn't prepared for. But, the minute I went public with my own experiences, as you can imagine, you get a lot of people that gravitate to you, or I'm sure you get it as well, having the expertise in this field. People want to talk to you. They want to share their experience. They want your advice. They want your hope, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
It's manageable most of the time. But there comes periods where it's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And the time to be able to devote to that is limited, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And, there is such a thing as compassion fatigue. And I really don't want this to come off as being ungrateful or, saying I'm not, I can't help people. I'll always do what I can. But I found myself at a point where, I'm struggling with that piece, where people are reaching out and I don't have the time to be as responsive as I used to be. And again, it's just a message of you're always struggling with something. And that's kind of my issue of the day, if you will.
Well, thank you for admitting that you're human, like the rest of us, right? As far as we know. I mean,
it's not easy. Yeah,
there's very few things that occur on this planet that are better than helping people and being there for people. We're all given 24 hours in a day, and we only have so much bandwidth, right? I think people understand that a lot too. But there's the glass half full of everything, but you've got to keep people's lives in mind there too. Everybody's always dealing with something. So that's hey, you're famous, so these things happen, right?
Well, I don't know about famous, maybe infamous, but
well. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of a time travel here. No hot tub included, but
okay.
I believe, not to sound like Brian Adams, but I believe it was the summer of 2015. I actually thought about this ahead of time, of course, but that was actually the year that I first attended the APHA Addiction Institute. It's had various names and all that.
Yeah.
And I believe I have before, but our audience out there, Pain Pod Nation, let me just put it this way. You must attend, seriously. It will make you a better person instantly. In fact, my wife, Dr. Gretchen Garofoli, of course, met me at the door when coming home from that conference meeting, get together, and commented upon my return. You're a better person for having attended even. Folks, I develop and present more CE than I can count, but I don't believe I've ever had a learning objective of being a better person. Insert the old teardrop and all that, but I'm being serious here too. So get there, register now. All right. Anyways, so I believe I first met Jake in Utah. Then we had a follow-up meeting here in Morgantown, Wild and Wonderful, West Virginia. You were with an industry crew at that time, discussing a product, which throughout that simple conversation, presentation, whatever, I realized, dang, this guy's good. And he gets it, to put it lightly. Going along the idea of avoiding that stinking thinking. That's what the pharmacist, Dan Schneider, of course, from Netflix, we had him here on the Pain Pod previously, how he put it one time. But year after year, more heartbeats stop due to drug overdoses. Went over the numbers earlier, but it's just incredibly hard to swallow, quite frankly. For all of us healthcare professionals, and present self included, and pretty much everybody in society who's ever listening, it's very hard to stop and smell the roses. Maybe see the forest in the trees, the 50,000-foot view, all that stuff. When it comes to the reality of our drug crisis, whether opioids, the illegal ones, prescription ones, the plethora of other illegal drugs, things like hallucinogens, dare I say cannabis, everything. It's really easy to get lost in the weeds or shuffle. No puns there, of course. But you got any recommendations to keep our sanity along the way?
Yeah. I think you kind of alluded to it, Mark. Honestly, it's being cautious and being conscious of where you're at. And, one of the things, again, you'll see this through the threads of the book, but one of the reasons I'm here is because I had people that were in my life around this time where I really wanted to absorb advice and wisdom, I think more importantly, as to how to stay on this path. And again, my therapist, who has now become a very close friend and peer, one of the early things he told me is there's two things you need to understand. You can't help everybody, and you can't help anyone unless you help yourself first. And he said, recovery, especially early recovery, is the only time in life you're allowed to be selfish. And since then, he's reminded me of that, where there are times when you are able to reflect and see that you're just not where you want to be, or you're struggling with something. Things need to stop, and you need to address that. And I think, especially as pharmacists, as healthcare professionals, by nature, we are selfless, we are empathetic, we are caring, and at times that causes us to neglect our own health and wellness. Especially for those of you out there in the community settings, it's a big topic in our profession right now, and the initiative of the current president of National Association of Board of Pharmacy is working conditions. And I think part of that, falls on the organizations clearly, but I think just as much falls on us as individuals. And we really need to stop and take time, as Mark said, to smell the roses, but more importantly, to reflect on where you're at. And, if there are things you're struggling with, you need to find somebody in life that you can talk to about it. And again, not to get all, pie in the sky or cheesy, as we like to say here up in Boston, but, we need to get past that hesitancy or that reluctance to share how we feel about things. And for me, that was the most rewarding, satisfying, comforting part or skill that I achieved in recovery. And again, it goes well beyond my substance use, because it was just not something I was ever able to do. It was not something that my family does well. It's not something that, my generation does well. So the minute we're able to do that, and again, it can be, every day, or it can be once a week, it can be once a month. But we need to really stop and reflect and ask ourselves, are we happy? And if we're not happy with whatever aspects that may be, what can we do to improve that? And very small things like that may take 5 to 10 minutes can make an absolute difference, not just on your life, but those around you.
So very well put. It's who knew that flight attendants had the keys to the kingdom of, you got to put your mask on first. And the airplane ones, folks, we're not going there. Good golly. To a good amount of listeners out there, hit pause, take some action. We all need it, right? All right. So you obviously shared a lot in your book, and various presentations, discussions all across the country and all that. Anything you haven't shared you'd like to share with us here today, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, there were several, when you write a book, and especially when you get to the copy editing piece, and just to give you an idea, the published version of that book is well over 20,000 words less than what my first draft was. Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of stuff you want to include, and part of it is there are certain people you want to be able to acknowledge that contributed so much, but they just may not fit in the story. There's certain experiences that you went through that just didn't seem to fit in the written word, if that makes sense. And it's there are several stories, and as we've talked about many times, some of them pop up, and I was actually out in Tennessee last week, and I was in Nashville, and I'm good friends with a guy by the name of Wes Gemmon, who's the chief pharmacy officer for the state of Tennessee, and he oversees all the addiction treatment in the state. And I was sitting down with his students, and this episode came to mind of the insanity of addiction, and we were talking about this one episode, and I realized I hadn't brought this up in a long time, and I'd certainly not included it in my book. But again, the topic was, how deep did your addiction go? How deep did your substance use go? And there was a period, after I got caught, and my crimes started to become evident, and I knew that I was being investigated, that, my brain still perceived that it needed substances. And, I knew that all the pharmacies in the area were on to the fact that I was writing fake prescriptions. So, what I did was I threw on some clothes from somebody else in my family that, something I wouldn't wear. I put my hair differently and I threw a hat on, and I took some fake prescriptions to a pharmacy that was about, 30 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And, I thought by putting on an act and believe it or not, using a Southern accent, that I would be able to convince this pharmacist that I had just moved to the area. I had 2 kids that had ADD, and I had to fill these prescriptions for Ritalin. And of course, I threw some clonidine in there to think that would, normalize this. And and instantly, again, you look back on these things, and it's absolutely crazy, but it really captures, how deep the addiction was. Again, I know the DEA was investigating me, the state police and local police were involved, and I'm still trying to pass phony prescriptions, in a pharmacy that's really not that far away.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I saw the pharmacist take the prescriptions and go back and get on the telephone, I bolted. And I remember just sprinting, and as I'm running to my car, I'm abandoning these clothes that I'm wearing. And it's okay to laugh at this, please. This is just insanity.
It's like a scene out of a Hollywood movie.
It really is. And this, I'm not embellishing this in any way, but I'm throwing the clothes off thinking, okay, they won't know the clothes. And, I hop in my car and I speed away, and I'm literally trying to take all these back roads to get home. And I'm stopping at certain places so that, throw the car, your brain just goes crazy. And, you reflect on that and you think of how insane that was and where I was at in that period and kind of where I've come now. And, it's reflecting on things like that are good deterrents to not wanting to go back to that. And trust me, I think of it every day. There isn't a day that goes by in my life that I don't think of potentially going back to using opioids or using stimulants. But all I have to do is follow through to conclusion. And that's where I'm going to end up. There's no question of that. So, there are these episodes and you tell them, and it's again, I don't really tell it for shock value. I tell it, to demonstrate how deep addiction can truly go. And somebody who's educated, who's a medical professional, and you'd say, people still ask, you should have known better. You're a pharmacist. I mean, that's crazy. And I say, well, that's addiction. I certainly take responsibility for my actions, but I also have to acknowledge the power of that disease.
With all due respect to DSM-5 and any other numbers upcoming, that is addiction. So,
certainly is.
Right along those same lines, I guess. I don't know if I'd say most, but many folks utilizing various substances end up injecting them. Yeah. How in the world did you not?
Well, I dabbled, but I think it's a very simple answer, Mark. Honestly, it's being a pharmacist and having access to what I had prevented me from going down that route. I mean, in that 15-year period that I was using, there was probably 2 to 3 times that I went to a dealer to obtain something. A local dealer. There's a lot of ordering stuff off the internet and other things and so forth. But I think it was just access to, my substances of choice. I certainly wasn't averse to it because, as you'll read in my book, I was injecting anabolic steroids when I was very, very young. So it wasn't a needle thing. I mean, there was a period where I got my hands on some injectable Demerol, meperidine, and was injecting that. But it simply wasn't, it wasn't necessary. I mean, you look at my history, or I reflect on my history, and, what I was using at the time was what I had access to through either my job, or, places off the internet, and being somewhat educated. Most of the time you knew what you were getting. But there are plenty of times where I didn't know what I was getting, and it almost cost me my life.
Yeah, that certainly brings up thoughts on the one pill can kill Call it a campaign, call it a phrase. I know our little Luke is he tells people that he's as you said, educated all of us in healthcare. We educate our kiddos too, right?
We do.
Which, by the way, kicking back to what we were talking about earlier, our son Luke was not named after Star Wars. I get that. Good golly. I thoroughly enjoy this Star Wars everything and all that. Don't get me wrong. I actually didn't watch my first one. Hate to admit this until I was 30. But I can tell you within 72 hours, I watched all the rest of them. So
there you go.
But anyways, the back to the one pill can kill. Oftentimes people say, it's an over sensationalization, or others will say, hey, how about we save some folks out there? It's a lot to unpackage, but what's the one pill can kill to you? Bring up anything?
Well, there's two things real quick. I'll give you a more current one, then I'll give you a later one. Most recently, I met with a group of parents in Los Angeles that were literally the victim of that statement, who had kids, and we're talking 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids who through Snapchat had obtained a single pill. These kids didn't really have any history of substance use disorder or, extended addiction substance use. Got one pill thinking it was oxycodone and it was fentanyl, and it obviously cost them their lives. So it's very, very real. The other later example, and this is in my book as well, people don't realize that the cartels have been doing this for decades. It certainly hasn't been as prevalent and as common as it is now, but in the early 2000s, I was subject to this. And I had been conversing on the phone with a pharmacy that I was told was in Mexico. And I remember speaking to the gentleman who claimed he was the pharmacist and basically saying, what do you want? And I said, well, I'm looking for Adderall. And he said, all right, I got some Adderall, 10 milligrams. Go down to Western Union, wire me $100 and I'll send you a bottle of 100 of these. And I did so. And the next day I got a package in the mail from DHL at the time. I don't even know if they're still in business, but it came and it was these unmarked blue tablets in an unmarked white bottle. And they were the similar kind of royal deep blue color of generic 10 milligram Adderall tablets, but no marking, no scoring on the tablets. And I'm telling the story and I can clearly remember this as clear as I'm sitting here today, but I remember kind of looking at them on my desk at home in my office, and my normal starting dose of stimulants when I would, kind of kick my day off is I would crush up, 3 or 4 of them and snort them. And I remember debating, should I just do that as I usually do, or should I be a little bit more cautious and just try 1 or 2? And I said,
that's a huge moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it just, you look back on it and just a split second decision, basically saved my life. And I can remember, rationalizing it, saying, well, I'll start with the 2. And if it doesn't work as well, then I'll kick in another couple. And I can't really tell you what happened. But my ex-wife, obviously was married at the time, but she came home from her job about 8 or 9 hours later and found me on the floor of my office. There was vomit everywhere. I was semi-conscious, babbling, and basically, picked me up and put me to bed and had no idea what happened. And, I had access to a friend who worked in a lab who had a mass spectrometer, and I gave him one of those tablets, and there was fentanyl in it, a large amount of fentanyl, along with some other things. There was codeine in it. There was merperidine. I reflect on that. And if I had done one more of those tablets, I wouldn't be here doing this podcast. It's just, it hits you so fast and has such an amnesic effect that it's just, you talk about one pill can kill. I mean, it's a powerful statement, but it's also an understatement.
Right. It's man, there's just so much that comes up within all of that. I know even within family or community discussions, I always say, little moments, little decisions, big consequences. So
absolutely.
Well, hindsight tells us lots and all that, but thank goodness for you, right?
Yeah. Amen to that.
I nowhere near that caliber, of course, but I actually recently had a high school friend reach out via Facebook, for what it's meant to connect people across time zones or whatever. It was sending positive vibes for, trying to make a difference in the world. He's one of our Pain Pod listeners, and saw some posts on LinkedIn and whatnot. But turns out he's a biology teacher at the school that we both attended, and want to know if he should bring this one pill can kill thing up with his students.
Yeah.
Folks, can you guess what my answer was? Now we want to, we want to at least attempt to avoid profanities on podcasts, of course, but I'll just go with a heck yeah, Billy. Easy answer, right? Yeah. And I hope that's the case for everyone. So. Yeah. All right, Jake, here's something I ask every Pain Pod guest. How do you define pain?
Wow. How do I define pain? I define pain as discomfort, as anything that you feel out of the ordinary, whether it's emotional or physical, something that just makes you feel not normal. It's not necessarily just a physical thing, and I think we tend to forget that. The emotional aspect of pain is just as much a part of it, if not more, than the physical aspects. But yeah, that's how I would define it. It is discomfort that is unbearable for whatever reason.
I usually have this succinct question, and there's a much longer answer by anyone, quite frankly, even myself. Yeah. I really appreciate extracting out your one word there, discomfort. Good golly. We don't always need paragraphs, right?
No.
That's very, very well put. So, all right. So in the realm of pain management, substance use disorder as well, hot topic out there. It's actually the idea of our last Pain Pod episode, but buprenorphine, elevator speech or conversation. Yeah. What would you like to tell the world about buprenorphine?
Yeah, I think we need to get over whatever stigma we have towards buprenorphine. And that may sound a little bit strong. And, the one thing I can say from a positive aspect is we've clearly gotten better. I've been working in this field for over 12 years now, and the stigma related to medication for addiction treatment, or MAT, has gone down somewhat, but it's still astounding to me that we have treatment programs all over the country which don't even offer this, as a treatment option for patients. Certainly not for everybody, but the fact that we're not offering folks the best clinical chance to reduce their risk of overdose and death, from a healthcare perspective, to me is completely unacceptable. So I hope we can move past that. I think removing the X waiver, is a requirement to be able to prescribe buprenorphine for the treatment of opioid use disorder is a step in the right direction in removing that stigma. But that's only a small piece of it. We still need to get clinicians to prescribe it, and to see those patients, as many of them like to say, in their clinics, regardless of what their discipline is. So I'm just hoping we can continue to move the needle forward, and get more people access to that medication and give them a chance at recovery like I've had.
Sounds like you know what you're talking about, eh? So, that was concentrating on the most recent Pain Pod episode. Let's look to a future one here. Keep the combo going. Tell us what's important to know about naloxone in 60 seconds or less. Go.
We need it. There's no other way to say it. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. If there is one thing that we can do to reduce the risk of overdose and ultimately death related to this disease we call addiction, specifically for opioids, it's naloxone. And as a profession, I think it's incumbent upon us to be the ones that are ensuring that folks have access to this. So we need to be advertising in our pharmacies. We need to be asking individuals if they want it. I think over the counter is a great step in the right direction. Again, it's not going to solve the opioid crisis by any means, but any way that we can enhance access. I came from a treatment center in North Carolina last week, or earlier this week, excuse me, and I've never seen anything like it. There was naloxone taped on every door, on every corner, in every bathroom of this facility. In the 2 hours that I was there, I probably saw about 200 doses just taped at random places around the facility. And I think that's the way we need to start thinking.
Yeah, if it's harder to find a defibrillator than naloxone in any given space, we might be onto something. Exactly. The whole location thing, good golly.
Yeah, well said.
All right. Well, before I forget here, something else I always ask our pain pod guests, what's your favorite pain medication and, of course, why?
Oh, wow. I think I would have to go back to buprenorphine. And I'll probably get criticism for saying, opioids here, but, I think buprenorphine is an underutilized pain medication for an opioid. And I think part of that is the stigma related to what it's primarily used for in treating opioid use disorder. But if we look at medications and we look at risk profiles, especially around opioids, very small doses of buprenorphine can have tremendous effects on analgesia and pain relief. And I think we need to do a better job at educating clinicians around this and encouraging them when their opioids are an appropriate choice to be able to use it. Because, there's much less euphoria. There's still a risk for misuse and potential, opioid use disorder with that. But it's certainly less than what we see with other Schedule II opioids. So I've always been a big fan, well before I was a patient and well before it was available for opioid use disorder. I was always wondering why we didn't utilize it more.
Yeah, it's our timeline, at least in our country, but really across the globe too. Buprenorphine being, both pain management and opioid use disorder. It's got a lot to unpackage.
Yeah,
it's got a lot of advantages and a lot of things. We still need to respect the pharmacology, of course, too. So well put. All righty, one more here. Whether it's in this chat we're having or in your book or various presentations and whatnot. You and I certainly like to mention our boys. So I can put my other hat on here. It's a baseball hat, obviously. So I'm asking as a dad who happens to casually be a pharmacist, how do you have the drug talks with your boys?
Yeah, very common question I get. And for, a period early in my recovery, I was very blunt and honest in saying, I don't know. And then I found the opening. And when that happened for me was when my now 13-year-old was around 7. And we were driving to baseball practice and he saw somebody walking on the side of the road who was smoking a cigarette. And he said, Dad, why would somebody do that? That seems disgusting. And I said, there's my opening. And it was, and my other son was in the car as well. And he was, 5-4 at the time. And we just started having those conversations. I call them breadcrumbs, dropping breadcrumbs. And I certainly didn't, disclose and go into my deep history at that point, but it eventually led within a year or two to talk about my own personal history and genetics and why we are at risk for that. So, I tell parents, I say, just look for the opportunities. Don't fear that discussion, especially if you have a family history of behavioral health or substance use in your own family, because those are risk factors. And that's a pretty, I don't want to say it's benign, but it's an easier thing for kids to understand that, it's hardwired into us. We are at a higher risk than other people. So the decisions that you make in life, have to be weighed very carefully. And now we're at the point where, anytime we see a depiction of any sort of addiction or substance use on television or in the movies, my boys will proactively identify it and we talk about it. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody. But if you had to pin me down for an answer, I'd say we look for opportunities, look for those breadcrumbs and introduce it a little bit at a time.
Big time help there for all of us parents out there. Couldn't thank you more. It's just carpe diem. Taking those opportunities and having the talks
exactly.
There. Hey, at the very least, it's going to be easier than the birds and bees talks, right?
Very true.
But another way of looking at it, though, it might be incredibly easier to have the conversation with a child compared to an adult.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Exactly.
All righty. Jake, I couldn't thank you enough for our conversation here today and quite frankly, friendship for all this time. But for the rest of us here, though, for Pain Pod Nation, I hope you enjoyed this. Check out other episodes, of course. Next one, we're probably going to be talking about opioid antagonists overall, which obviously is going to highlight some of the OTC naloxone pearls, panels, chats, debates, whatever you call it, across our country. So, folks, as Pain Guy, I just want to say join us next time on the Pain Pod.
If you'd like to join Mark on the Pain Pod, send us an email to publisher at pharmacypodcast.com. And make sure to share the show and subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. Thanks for listening.